Texas Panhandle, spring of 1881, the wind carried dust across the dry plains as Naomi Merrick stood alone on the porch of a house that no longer belonged to her. The sun was just starting to dip low, casting long shadows across the stretch of land she had once hoped to raise children on. But the cradle inside was empty, same as her ring finger now. 3 months ago, her husband Samuel had taken the news of her barrenness with a silence that chilled her to the bone. 2 weeks later, he was gone back east, back to his family, back to a life where he could start over with someone who might give him sons. Naomi had not cried when he left. She sat with her back straight as he packed, hands folded in her lap like a schoolmarm. But after the door shut, her heart cracked. Now all she had was a small bag of coins, a mule that needed shoeing, and a contract for a parcel of land she could no longer afford to keep. She heard the wagon before she saw it. A creaking wheel, a jangle of reins. Dust swirled as the horses slowed, and a man jumped down with a loose-limbed energy that made him look younger than he probably was. "You Naomi Merrick?" he asked, brushing road dust from his hat. His voice was warm, edges rough like barnwood. "Name's Vaughn Fletcher. Your cousin Emmett down in San Angelo said you might need a hand." Naomi stared at him. He was tall, sun-browned, with sandy hair too long for polite company. A cowhand, through and through boots worn thin, shirt sleeves rolled, and eyes like the edge of a storm but full of something softer too. "I did not ask him to send anyone," she said, lifting her chin. "Well, he said you would say that," Vaughn replied, grinning as he walked toward the porch. "Said you were too proud by half and just stubborn enough to turn away help even if the roof was caving in." "Which it might be, judging by the angle." Naomi crossed her arms. "The house is not your concern, Mr. Fletcher." "No, ma'am," he said, surprisingly gentle now. "But you are," she blinked. No one had spoken to her like that in months, not since Samuel whispered sweet lies about forever. She exhaled slowly and stepped aside. "I have no money to pay you. Good thing I am not charging. I eat light, and I fix roofs better than I talk." That night, Vaughn slept in the barn he fixed up himself, and Naomi sat by the fire wondering what sort of man showed up for nothing. She had met few like that. Her mother always said men wanted something, sooner or later. But Vaughn only asked for coffee in the morning and a job to do. By the end of the week, he had patched the roof, replaced the door hinges, and built a new chicken coop from scrap wood. Naomi found herself watching from the kitchen window more than she meant to, startled by the way he laughed when the rooster chased him or how he talked softly to the mule like it was an old friend. One afternoon, she brought him lemonade, and he tipped his hat, sweat dripping from his brow. "You always this quiet?" he asked, taking the glass. "I talk when I have something to say," she replied. "Well, I hope you find something to say to me soon. I would like to hear what your voice sounds like when you are not arguing." That earned him a reluctant smile. It was the first in a long time. He made her laugh 2 days later when he tripped over a bucket and landed flat on his back in the mud. Naomi had not laughed like that in a year, and it surprised her just how warm it felt. "See. There is that sound," Vaughn said, still lying in the dirt, grinning up at her. "You are impossible." "Maybe, but I got a laugh out of you." They fell into a rhythm after that. Vaughn taught her how to mend fence posts and she showed him how to bake bread without burning it. He told stories of cattle drives and river crossings, and she told him about her childhood in Georgia, about her mother's garden, and the way her father used to sing hymns on the front porch. He never asked about Samuel, and she never offered. But one evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun fall behind the hills, Naomi spoke. "He left because I cannot give him children." Vaughn turned to her, slow and careful. "That does not sound like a reason a decent man would leave," she shrugged. "A woman is expected to bear children." "I could not, so I was no longer enough." He was quiet for a moment, then he leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You are more than enough, Naomi Merrick. Any man with sense would see that." She looked at him. "Why are you really here, Vaughn?" He met her gaze, steady and sure. "Because Emmett said you needed help, and because when I saw you standing on this porch, I knew I wanted to stay." Something shifted then. Not sudden, not wild, just a quiet settling like dust after a storm. That night she made stew and they ate by lantern light. Vaughn reached across the table and brushed a curl from her face. "You have the kindest eyes," he said, voice low, "and I would like to see them looking at me every morning if you would let me." Her heart beat faster, but she did not pull away. "I do not know if I can give you anything." "You already have," he said. "You just do not know it yet." And she believed him. For the first time in months, Naomi slept without waking from dreams of empty cradles and closed doors. And when she woke, the sun was warm on her face and she heard Vaughn humming outside as he fed the chickens. It was a beginning. Not the one she once pictured, but maybe, just maybe, the right one. The wind shifted with the season, carrying the scent of mesquite blossoms and distant rain. Naomi stood beside the clothesline, pinning up a damp shirt with fingers that no longer trembled. The days had grown steadier. Vaughn's presence had settled into the rhythm of her world like a verse she hadn't realized was missing. He came in from the pasture with a handful of purple prairie clover and a grin barely hidden beneath his sun-darkened beard. "These grow wild down by the creek bed. Thought they might look nice on the table." Naomi took the bouquet, brushing her thumb over the blossoms. "They'll do better in a bowl of water than in your hands," she said, but her voice held no edge. "Then I'll fetch the bowl," he replied, heading toward the house without waiting. That evening, while the breeze moved gently through the open windows, she found him hunched over her sewing basket, threading a needle with exaggerated care. "I lost a button," he said, not looking up. "Didn't want to ask you to fix it. You'd rather sew it on sideways. I'd rather not be helpless. My sister used to say a man ought to know how to mend what he wears." Naomi leaned against the doorway, watching him fumble through the task with quiet determination. "You have a sister, had." "Lydia died of fever when I was 17. She was older and mean as a wasp if you crossed her. She's the reason I know how to cook without burning the beans." Naomi stepped closer. "I never had siblings, just me and my parents and the land." Vaughn looked up from the needle. "That a lonely thing, sometimes, but I learned to be content with silence." He nodded, then held the shirt up, button dangling askew. "Well, it's there," he said. "Might not be straight, but it'll hold." She took the shirt from his hands and inspected it. "You sewed through both layers of fabric. It won't open now." "Then I guess I won't be losing that button again." Her smile was restrained but genuine. She laid the shirt over the back of a chair before turning to pour warm water into a basin. As she washed the day's dust from her arms, Vaughn leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "I was thinking," he said. "There's a church social in Amarillo next week. Reverend's throwing it on account of his daughter getting married. Plenty of folks coming in from the outlying farms. Thought you might like to go." Naomi dried her hands, folding the cloth neatly. "I haven't been to a gathering in over a year." "Then it's time." She met his eyes, uncertain. "Folks know what happened. They talk. They'll talk no matter what. All that matters is whether you want to go." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked to the window and watched the low sun set fire to the horizon. The dusk light softened everything it touched, even the fence line she'd rebuilt board by board with Vaughn at her side. "I'll think on it," she said. He nodded once, then pushed off the wall. "That's all I ask." The days leading up to the social passed in quiet preparation. Naomi surprised herself by letting Vaughn hitch up the wagon and even pressed one of her older dresses, though the fabric had gone a bit soft at the seams. She combed her hair with more care than usual, unsure if it was the event or the man beside her that made her stomach flutter. On the day of the gathering, the sky was wide and blue, scattered with clouds that promised shade but no storm. The ride into Amarillo was long, but they spoke easily about the shape of the land, the birds nesting in the cottonwoods, the way the wheat swayed like golden waves where the wind caught it. At the churchyard, laughter spilled from the gathering crowd. Children chased each other between tables laden with pies and jugs of lemonade. Naomi hesitated near the edge, her fingers twisting into her skirt. Vaughn leaned close without touching her. "You don't owe anybody an explanation, just be." She nodded, then stepped forward. They ate under a broad oak, shared slices of apple pie, and listened to an old fiddler coax tunes from memory. Naomi's shoulders relaxed as the afternoon wore on. When Vaughn offered his hand during a square dance, she hesitated only a moment before placing hers in his. They moved together with a tentative grace, not polished but in rhythm. Naomi laughed when he missed a step and stepped on her toe, and he laughed too, unbothered by his own misstep. Later, as dusk settled and lanterns were lit around the yard, Naomi sat beside Vaughn on the wagon's tailgate, her hands folded in her lap. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For not letting me stay hidden." He glanced at her, his expression softened by the lantern light. "You're not someone meant to be hidden, Naomi." She looked down, then back toward the glowing church windows. "What if I never have a child? You already have a life," he said. "And I'd be honored to share it with you, whatever it brings." Her breath caught just a little, but she reached over and took his hand, fingers threading between his. He didn't speak again, and neither did she. They sat together in the hush, the prairie wind rustling through the grass and the warmth of his palm steady in hers. It was not the kind of night she ever imagined, but it was one she would remember, not for what was said, but for what was finally understood. The morning after the church social, Naomi rose early, the quiet in her chest unfamiliar but welcome. The light that crept through the lace curtains painted golden lines across the floor, and somewhere beyond the barn, Vaughn was already chopping wood. She didn't need to look to know it. The rhythm of his presence had become a part of the house, subtle, steady, like the ticking of her mother's old mantel clock. She poured hot water into the washbasin, the scent of lye soap rising with the steam. As she scrubbed her hands, she caught her reflection in the windowpane. There was color in her cheeks again. Not from sun or shame, but from something quieter, something gathering strength inside her. By the time she stepped out onto the porch, he was stacking the last of the firewood against the wall, shirt clinging to his back, his hat tossed over a rail. She leaned one shoulder to the doorframe and watched him finish. "You're up early," he said, brushing splinters from his palms. "I figured you'd sleep in after all that dancing." "I'm used to rising with the sun." Vaughn stretched, arms high, and then nodded toward the corral. "I was thinking we might ride to the ridge after breakfast. There's a patch of wild plums coming in." She hesitated. "That's a half-day's ride there and back. That bother you?" "No," she said. "I just haven't ridden that far in a while." "Well," he said, stepping closer, "we'll go slow. No need to prove anything to anybody." They packed bread, apples, and a jar of smoked meat, and by mid-morning they were riding side by side beneath a sky so wide it made Naomi feel small in the best kind of way. She rode her old mare, while Vaughn led on a gelding with a white blaze and a habit of tossing his head for no reason at all. They didn't talk much. The wind took most words, and neither had much need for them. But when they reached the ridge and tethered the horses beneath a twisted oak, Vaughn turned to her with something unreadable in his eyes. "I used to come up here when I worked for the Rankins, back when I didn't have a place of my own. I'd bring a book sometimes. Just sit and look out." Naomi followed his gaze. The land stretched for miles, soft hills and scrub, the faint glint of a creek winding through it all. "It's peaceful," she said. "Sometimes I'd imagine what it'd be like to share it. Not just sit alone." She shifted her weight, the breeze tugging loose strands from her braid. "You could have had someone before now." "I tried," he said, sitting down on a flat stone, "but I never found a woman who looked at the world the way I do. Most wanted a man with land money, a house with rooms to fill. And you, I wanted quiet mornings, shared work, someone who'd sit beside me and not need to fill the air with noise." Naomi sat too, folding her skirt beneath her. "You're not what I expected. Is that good or bad?" "I haven't decided yet," he chuckled, low and warm. "Fair." They shared the food in silence, and when the jar was emptied and the sun began its slow westward lean, Vaughn leaned back on his elbows. I don't need children to feel whole, he said. I know the world expects it and I won't pretend I never thought about it, but I've seen men with 4 sons who still die lonely. Naomi turned to face him fully. You're not saying this for my sake. No. I'm saying it because it's true. She stared at him a long moment. You speak plain. Too plain sometimes. No, not too plain. They rode home in the soft hush of evening, dust rising around the horses' hooves. When they reached the house, Naomi didn't go inside. She led her mare to the rail, unsaddled her with practiced hands, and turned to find Vaughn watching her. What is it? She asked. He stepped forward, not in haste, nothing urgent in his movement, just sure. I want to build something with you, he said. Not just patch roofs and mend gates. I mean a life, one that starts with us and stays steady. Naomi didn't look away. And if I never change, if I never give you more than this, he took her hand, rough palm against hers, then I'll still be grateful. Because what you've given already is more than I ever thought I'd find. She didn't answer in words. Instead, she reached up and pressed her forehead against his chest, her breath steady, her shoulders no longer braced against the world. And he held her, the way a man holds something precious but not fragile. Not a promise made in haste, but one earned in the slow unfolding of trust. That night, she lit the lamp in the kitchen and set out 2 plates without hesitation. The table no longer felt too wide. The silence no longer felt empty. And when they sat down to eat, it wasn't as 2 people sharing space, it was as 2 people who had chosen, slowly and without ceremony, to belong. The late summer heat hung over the land, thick and slow. Naomi stood barefoot in the garden Vaughn had tilled by hand, her hem damp with morning dew and a basket of ripe beans resting at her hip. The soil was coarse and stubborn, but green shoots had taken root, and the rows bore fruit now. She traced one with her fingertips, the leaves warm from the sun. Behind her, the barn door creaked open. Vaughn stepped out, buttoning a clean shirt, his hair still damp from the pump. He'd been helping the Carsons brand calves the past 2 days, and the labor had left his shoulders tight, his gait heavier. She watched him stretch, jaw tense, before he caught sight of her. I was hoping you'd still be out here, he said, walking over. Didn't want to miss the morning light on your face. She raised an eyebrow. You feeling poetic now, just truthful? She handed him the basket. You can shell these. He took it without protest and sat on the porch steps, spreading a cloth across his knees. Naomi followed, settling beside him with a bowl for the beans. They worked in tandem, the quiet broken only by the soft pop of pods opening. After a while, Vaughn spoke. I got a letter from a man I used to ride with. Name's Henry Bell. He's setting up a horse breeding outfit near Palo Duro Canyon. Asked if I'd come help him get the place running. Naomi's hands paused. You thinking of going? I told him I'd only consider it if I wasn't needed here. She kept her eyes on the beans. And are you? I'd like to be, but that's not my call to make. Her fingers moved slower now. Seems you wouldn't have mentioned it if your mind was made up. I mentioned it because I don't want to keep things from you. That's not the kind of life I want between us. Naomi looked up. What kind of life do you want? One where we make decisions together. Where we build something that's ours, not just mine or yours. She nodded once and went back to work. They shelled in silence until the basket was empty. Vaughn stood, brushing his hands clean. I'll turn him down, he said. If you want me here, I do, she said, looking up at him. But not because you feel you owe me anything. I want to stay because I've never had this before, this steadiness, this peace, he hesitated, and because I want to ask you something. She rose, dusting off her skirt. I've got no ring yet, he said. But I'll get one if you say yes. She folded her arms, not from doubt but to steady herself. Go on. I want to marry you, Naomi, not because you need someone to save you, and not because I want land of my own, though I wouldn't mind that someday. I want to marry you because you're the strongest person I've ever known, and you've made room in your life for me without asking that I be anything other than who I am. She stared at him for a long time, her chest rising slow with each breath. You'll have to keep shelling beans, she said finally. And learn to patch trousers proper. I will. And I won't be anyone's second try. If we do this, it's for keeps. For keeps, he said. You have my word. She took his hand, fingers calloused and warm, and held it against her cheek. Then yes. He stepped forward, and she let him wrap his arms around her. The scent of hay and morning sweat clung to him, familiar now, comforting. She closed her eyes and leaned into the space. They'd carved together one not built on expectations or promises of children, but on laughter, quiet trust, and the kind of faith that grows only in the wake of loss. That evening they sat on the porch steps again, the sun dropping behind the cottonwoods. Naomi tucked her feet beneath her, her shoulder brushing his. "I'll write Emmett," she said. "Tell him you're staying. I reckon he'll be glad you didn't run me off." She smiled out at the horizon. He knew what he was doing. Vaughn reached over and laced his fingers through hers, and they sat that way until the last of the light faded from the sky. Two people who had weathered the worst and found, in each other, a home that asked nothing more than truth and offered everything in return. The first frost came early that year, dusting the fields in a white hush that lingered past sunrise. Naomi pulled her shawl tighter as she stepped outside, breath turning silver in the air. The garden had gone to sleep, and the hens refused to leave their roosts until the sun climbed higher. Inside, Vaughn had already stoked the stove, and the smell of baking cornmeal rose with the warmth. They had married quietly 2 weeks after the harvest ended, with only Reverend Miller and the Carson family as witnesses. No lace, no bouquet, just Naomi's best dress and Vaughn's Sunday shirt, pressed until the creases stood sharp. He'd built a cedar bench beneath the cottonwood where they'd exchanged vows, and sometimes they sat there in the evenings, saying nothing at all. Today, she found him in the lean-to, bent over the cradle he was carving from mesquite. His knife moved slow, steady, each stroke revealing the curve of the headboard. He didn't look up when she entered. "You've been at it since breakfast," she said, brushing wood shavings from the stool before sitting. "Wanted to get the legs square before the cold sets in deeper, harder to shape once the sap freezes." She watched the cradle rock slightly under his hand. "There's no rush, I know. But I want it ready, whether we fill it now or not." Naomi folded her hands in her lap. "You remember the McKinnons from the church social," he nodded, setting the knife down. "Their girl's near 12 now, had that string of fever last spring. They're moving north. Her lungs can't take the dust anymore. They asked if we'd taken their milk cow, said they'd rather see her with someone who'd care for her proper than sell her off to rail hands." He wiped his hands on his trousers. "We've got room in the pasture. There's more," Naomi said. "They asked if we'd consider taking the girl too, just until they're settled. A few months, maybe longer. Said she's strong now, just needs a place to finish healing. She'd have her own bed, I'd teach her." Vaughn leaned back against the beam, eyes narrowing, not in doubt but in thought. "She'd need gentleness, and space to be quiet without being alone." Naomi nodded. "I remember what it was like being young and knowing something in your body didn't work the way it should. Feeling like folks only saw what was broken." He looked at her then, not just her face but something deeper, as if measuring the weight of her words. "You think we could be that place for her? I think we already are." Later that day, they hitched the wagon and rode out to meet the McKinnons at the halfway point between their farms. The girl, Clara, climbed into the back without a word, her coat too thin and her hands tucked deep into her sleeves. Naomi offered her a blanket and the girl accepted it with a nod, eyes never quite lifting. At home, they gave her the corner room with the east window where the sun came earliest and the air stayed warmest. Clara didn't speak much, but she listened. She followed Naomi into the kitchen most mornings, slicing apples or folding dough without being asked. In the evenings, she sat near Vaughn as he worked, sketching horses onto scraps of paper with a pencil worn nearly to the nub. One night, as Naomi knit by the fire, Clara spoke without turning her head. "I used to dream about living near trees." Naomi set her needles down. "And now, I don't have to dream it anymore." Winter deepened. The first snow came on the third week of December, and Vaughn built a sled from scrap wood so the three of them could ride down the slope behind the barn. Clara laughed then, a sound neither Naomi nor Vaughn had heard before, and it echoed off the trees like music. On Christmas morning, they found her curled on the hearth rug, her sketchbook open beside her, pages filled with drawings of chickens, the mule, and a detailed rendering of Naomi's hands kneading bread. Vaughn crouched beside her. "You've got an eye for detail." "Papa says I get that from Mama," Clara said, tracing the edge of a page. "She used to draw wildflowers on the inside of the pantry door." Naomi knelt, brushing a curl behind the girl's ear. "You're welcome to paint ours if you'd like. I'd like that." Months passed. Clara grew stronger, her cough faded and her cheeks pinked with spring sun. She followed Naomi into the fields, learned the names of birds, the sound of different winds. Vaughn taught her to saddle the mare and let her lead the old mule to water when the creek thawed. The McKinnons wrote in late March. They'd found a place in Colorado, higher up, with clean air and a school nearby. They said they'd come for Clara by the end of April. The morning after the letter came, Naomi found Vaughn sitting on the porch, whittling a new handle for the kitchen ladle. "She won't want to leave," he said, eyes on the grain of the wood. "She shouldn't have to," Naomi replied. He glanced up. "You thinking what I'm thinking? If we ask, it has to be her choice." When Clara came in from feeding the hens, Naomi poured her tea and handed her the letter. The girl read it silently, then folded the paper and set it aside. "You want to go?" Naomi asked. Clara looked between them. "I want to stay." They wrote the McKinnons again, and 2 weeks later the papers arrived by post. Legal guardianship, signed and witnessed. On the first day of May, Vaughn planted a plum tree beside the bench under the cottonwood. Clara pressed the roots into the soil with her bare hands, and Naomi watered it in, her heart full. That evening, Naomi watched Vaughn and Clara from the kitchen window. He was showing her how to measure fence rails, his hands guiding hers over the tape. They were laughing about something, and the sound settled in Naomi's bones like warmth after a long freeze. She stepped outside, wiping her hands on her apron. Vaughn turned to her. "We're thinking of building a little studio for her, somewhere she can paint when the light's good." Naomi smiled. "We've got lumber enough." Clara looked up. "Can we paint the door blue?" Naomi nodded. "Any color you like." As the sun dipped behind the ridge, they stood together by the young tree, watching the leaves catch the last of the light. Vaughn slipped his arm around Naomi's waist, and Clara leaned against her side, small and solid. They didn't speak. There was no need. Everything that mattered had already been said in actions, in choices, in the quiet, steady building of a life that had once seemed impossible and now stretched before them, rich with belonging. The wind stirred the branches, and Naomi lifted her face to it, eyes closed. It smelled of earth and new growth of something lasting.